All right, well, I'd like to thank everybody for attending our fourth webinar in our Wellbeing Webinar series. That's a mouthful to say on a Thursday afternoon, but I appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to join us for this series today. And today we're going to be discussing burnout in the context of belonging at work, and hopefully providing you all with some great takeaways at the end of this. We'll be spending a little bit of time getting into breakout rooms, and Dr. Rosenstein will also be providing us with some tips and strategies and coping mechanisms. So for those of you who don't know me and who are new to the Wellbeing crew, my name is Disha Mahendra, and I'm the Director of Diversity Initiatives and Community Building for the Office of Diversity at Dornsife. And we're joined by Dr. Kimberly Freeman also. She's the Associate Dean and Chief Diversity Officer. And we have Dr. Ilene Rosenstein from Campus Wellbeing and Education, and she serves as the Associate Vice Provost. So without further ado, I'm going to manage technology now and get my screen shared. All right. So today we're going to be starting with the reflection. And like I said, we'll get into some definitions. We'll go through what the stress cycle is, discuss a little bit about belonging and culture, talking about ending with self-awareness and how that's a great tool in coping with burnout, and then hitting the road. So I'm going to get us all into breakout rooms. Ilene, if you have any thoughts, or Kimberly, I'll just need a second to assign people.
Well, it may be helpful if we can advance to the question so people can see, and then we can talk about what we're saying here. Burnout is very personal. It's something that becomes part of us. It's different than just being stressed. So we want to ask you, what does burnout mean to you? What does it feel like? What do you feel? What is it? How do you know you're getting burnt out or are burnt out? And so if you can share that with each other, because I think one thing that's important before we get to how to prevent or even recover from being burnt out, we want to help you figure out what type of burnout you have, because there are different types of burnout and therefore different solutions. Disha, do you need me to talk more? Because
nope, I'm ready to open the rooms.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like the conversations, there were quite a few of them, and many were talking. And were there themes that came up, or similarities or differences that you found? How did you define burnout? What was it for you? Anyone want to speak up? And feel free to also use the chat feature as well.
I'll start. Some of our commonalities were that exhaustion / also the inability to feel like you're getting good rest. And a lot of us talked about forgetfulness, or standing up and not remembering what the thing was that you stood up for, kind of thing, which was right. Something that we, sometimes you don't even think about as maybe being a sign of burnout.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah. I think exhaustion is probably, many people talked about that. How about for other groups?
My name is Elisa, and in our group we talked about feeling resentful, resentfulness coming up, feeling more irritable as feelings associated with burnout. And we talked about the blurred lines between work and home at this time, and how it's difficult to exit work. And for some of us, I think, maybe for all of us, but how there hasn't been that kind of, both on the day-to-day, but also across the months, there hasn't been that break, that it's only been busier. And so the burnout is both, heading into fall is feeling the burnout now, anticipating fall, and how to work with the semester.
Yeah. And I hear Debbie saying mental and physical exhaustion. And sometimes people also kind of say just psychologically, just can't think. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Elisa. Yeah. Anybody else want to add? Well, if we can go to the next slide. You're absolutely right. This is the official professional thing. And what I really want to stress here, it's not just an individual failure. It's not about you, it's about the context, because what's happening is that stress is normal in our jobs, right? And we have stress response. So when you see a stack of things that you have to do and your to-do list is too long, that may be stressful. And sometimes we have to engage more to get things done. But burnout is really a chronic state, and it keeps going, and it affects who we are. So it's this prolonged exposure to the chronic emotional and interpersonal stresses of the job that end up in the things that all of you talked about: the exhaustion, the resentfulness, the never feeling a break. It's always there. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Okay, I don't know what happened. Not a response to this group. Laura, I'm not sure what that meant, but okay. Yeah. So, yeah. And again, the essential focus here is that it's an individual stress experience within a larger context of people, their relationship to work. So some people say to me, well, if it's always work, I feel exhausted sometimes being a mother. Well, being a mother is a job. Because you're responsible to take care of things. So when we say work, it's really that we're doing something that we're expected to do. And it's the chronicness of this, and it's the context, it's the environment that's actually causing it. It's not because you're not doing it right. And then many of you mentioned this. If we can go to the next slide, please. What is burnout? And many of you talked about exhaustion, and it's emotional, it could be psychological, physical, and it is related to work overload and social context, excuse me. So it's it's a little bit more than that, because there are some people who have a lot on their plate and they don't get burnout. Well, why don't they get burnout? We're going to talk about that in a little bit later. But one of the issues is that you may care too much about your performance. We find in our studies that people who burn out are the people who care the most, that they really want to do a good job. And it's for too long so this emotional kind of feeling of, and now you mentioned this about no break, that leads to a sense of more likely burnout, because it's always coming at you and it's there for too long. There's no break. So we have to really artificially create those breaks. And Alyssa talked about resentfulness, I think, and that comes under this heading of cynicism and depersonalization. What happens over time where you really, can't take anymore, you get emotionally disengaged. So you go from caring a lot to finally getting almost apathetic, like I just don't care. And what happens is you get a depletion of empathy to yourself, empathy to others, caring, compassion, and especially in those people who are caregivers or give to others. So for example, 30% of faculty in several studies, it always comes around anywhere from 25 to 30%, actually have high scores of burnout. And they develop, and I wonder, we had the value surveys, and many of the 10-year faculty really talked about the entropy that they experience. And I wonder if this is part of the cynicism and depersonalization. And what it is you're really trying to protect yourself from work, is what happens, is that you don't care, you disengage, you move away, and you get resentful for how much you have to do. I don't want to do this. And then eventually you get to a place that you might not even care. And then inefficiency. And what that means is there's a decreased sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of futility, like I can never get to all of it, or feeling that nothing you do makes a difference, that you try to influence something or change something and it doesn't matter, it stays the same, or it goes to a direction that you don't really want. Or there's a sense of lack of accomplishments. Many of us have these long lists, to-do lists, that become frightening to us and stressful because it's like a threat that's there that you never feel like you can get enough done. And when you're not meeting expectations or fighting against an unsupportive environment, you get a sense of like, what's the point? So each of you may have different amounts. Some of us have all three of these type of burnouts. Some of us have more one or the other, and there are different kind of solutions depending on which one you have. So, and sometimes just the self-awareness, for example, that you've moved from being stressed to now resentful, that's kind of saying I'm on the continuum of getting depersonalized, cynical, and I have to get back to a place where I care just enough, not too much, but enough, and really feel and get from my environment that what I'm doing matters. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. But we want to talk a little bit about the stress cycle, because this is the prevention. By understanding the stress cycle and where you can intervene and complete it is one way to stop from getting burnt out. And also, if you're already burnt out, how to kind of pull yourself back. Disha, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So if everyone can see this chart, it kind of starts in bold with the stressor. So what the stressor is, if anyone wants to shout out in the chat what they think stressors are, or what some stressors are in your life, we can kind of get this a little interactive. But a stressor is an event or a condition within your surrounding that causes stress. So I see deadlines. Shay, that's a great one. A couple for deadlines. I feel like that's going to be a popular one. And stressors cause different kinds of stress: acute stress, chronic stress. So acute being short-term, or a new stressor in your life, chronic being a little bit more long-term. And so our stress responses will literally cause internal bodily harm, as you can see, wear and tear on body and organ systems. And so stress-induced XYZ, stress-induced blood pressure, stress-induced back pain. I think I deal with chronic shoulder pain and neck pain from stress. And there's no cure, like no hospital medical cure for stress other than digging into finding out what your stressor is and tackling it. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and talk about the stress response cycle. So Ilene mentioned about needing to complete the stress response cycle every time we deal with the stressor. So what the stress response cycle is a list, basically a list of things that you can do to return your body to a place of safety and peace. So some things that you can do are physical activity, being with your family and friends, exercising, some breathing, meditation, engaging with people, and some key examples that I'm going to talk about that I personally really like are scheduling sleep. That's something that I've recently started to do because I work. I am a doctoral student. I'm a newlywed, and so I have a lot of things going on, and I find if I literally schedule my sleep, I'm more likely to be like, okay, it's 11 o'clock, my sleep reminder's on, I should probably get to bed now. And so that's something that personally helps me. A lot of people who suffer from burnout experience sleep guilt also, like I need to get this done so I can't sleep, or I need to put my sleep off. Don't recommend doing that. Another thing that helps with completing the stress cycle is time blocking, which we've talked about in previous webinars before, the habit stacking, putting your key activities that you need to get, or key tasks that you need to get done together. Another thing that helps a lot is affection. There's a quote, and I can't remember where it was from, but it says hugging into relaxation. And that's something that actually, the physical act of hugging for, I think it's
6 seconds.
6 seconds. It's enough time to return your body back to a place of I'm okay and I can get through this and I can move on to the next thing.
And you don't have to have another person hug you either for this effect. So putting on like nice hand lotion on your hands and rubbing it and paying attention to it, that physiologically pulls you back from the stress response. Because what's happening in the old days, you had the lion in the room and then the lion left and your body said, oh, no more stress, I can relax. So we purposely have to relax because as you all have mentioned, the lion's still in the room. Our work is literally in our house. So, yeah.
Yeah. And another important takeaway that I really enjoyed learning about with in terms of dealing with the stress cycle or completing the stress cycle is using imagination. And I thought it was really interesting. And an example that I had heard is you can imagine yourself completing the stress cycle by instigating yourself into a space of dominance where you're literally crushing your stress. Like imagining or envisioning yourself as like Godzilla and like, you know, going through the city, stomping on all your stress. I haven't tried that personally, but I think I might need to soon once the fall semester starts. So one thing that I want to, before I pass this back to Ilene, is leave you all with this. Wellness is not a state of mind or being. Wellness is a state of action. Wellness is freedom for your body to move through the cycles of living in a million bodies. Wellness is the freedom to oscillate. So we need to work through attaining freedom to move through the different cycles that are naturally occurring in our lives.
Before you comment, Ilene, when Disha mentioned the Godzilla metaphor, I was thinking of the work of Amy Cuddy at Harvard and how she talks about power posing. I mean, there are simple ways that you can just stand that really take up space and allow you to regain control, if you will. And so to me, I think that what's interesting about what we're discussing is that there's a physical, you know, bodily component to how we manage burnout, in addition to some of the psychological and, you know, kind of cerebral ways that we think about it. So I just thought that was interesting. When you were talking about Godzilla, it reminded me of that TED Talk. If you are interested in, anyone's interested in seeing it, her name is Amy Cuddy, and she is a psychologist at Harvard who writes about taking up space and reclaiming your power through different power poses.
Yeah, the starfish. I think I've heard snippets of that before too.
I think the important part that you're both saying is it's physiological. So the stress response, we have a physiological response, and we need to turn off our brains and we need to turn off our body to say we're now safe. It's psychological, and it's hard because on one hand you're going, no, I don't feel safe. I have all this to do. I have all this stuff. And what we're actually doing is threatening ourselves. And that's why it's real important to also prioritize, like what's reasonable to expect to do today. And I like, Disha, what you said, which is besides the self-care part, we have to be intentional about this. So what does the intentional piece look like here? If we can go to the next slide. So research shows that for us to have well-being in the workplace, there's certain things we need. And oftentimes we look at workload playing a part, and it does, but it's not the most important part. So in other words, even if we reduced your workload, which most people ask for or hope for, it doesn't change out the burnout because it's these other factors that really matter. So one is autonomy. So ask yourself and reflect right now, how much control do you feel like you have in your workplace? Is that a problem, that you don't feel control? Whether it's over your workload, but it could also be about influencing what your team is doing on, etc. How much discretion do you have to figure out how you want to do work? And that could be very important too, in the sense of really thinking about, so our way, like, do I have places where I can be creative and influence. So that may be something that matters to you. And if it doesn't, that's okay too, but that could be one of the reasons. And if autonomy is the issue, you need to kind of look and figure out, like, okay, can I get it autonomy? How can I ask for it? Is there a way that I can help my team understand why this is important for all of us? A second one is a sense of belonging. And this is going to sound funny, that oftentimes people feel like rewards come from salary or benefits, but the research really says that it's a sense of belonging, that's the social rewards that make a difference and are more important. And this is things like feeling that people appreciate you, that what you do in your unit matters, that your relationships, you have some relationships, it doesn't have to be all relationships, that are trusting, supportive, and that will focus on problems and solve them. Because another way we get burnt out is the same problem exists over and over again, and we don't actively solve it. So in your units, in your work every day, how do I develop more trusting relationship, more supportive relationships, move it towards a problem-solving piece? And this is what the office I work with, Campus Wellbeing and Education, works with teams to kind of get these senses of belonging and helping things to move towards autonomy. And then there's a sense of you're competent. Some of us are burnt out because we don't feel we have the skills to face the challenge. And if that's the case, how do I get that? How do I get those skills? Can I find a mentor, a supervisor? Can I, read things that would inform me to make me feel competent? And one thing we often don't do is take time to feel good about what we do accomplish. I've brought this up before, I think, in this group, but I use a method called the Pomodoro method, which is I stack down 5 things that I can do during the day. I look at my schedule first. Is this real? If I'm back to back, I'm not going to get those 5 things done. So realistically looking at the expectations, as well as, and this is something to speak to supervisors about too, if they have expectations that it's aptly there, it's real important to kind of show your schedule and how you're doing it and working that. But at the end of the day, I do gratitude, and I also look at my accomplishments, that I did get a lot done and do a lot. And I think we don't take time out to do this. Meaning is another, and this is the values piece. Ask yourself, why am I here? Why am I doing this? Now, sometimes you're doing this just to support your family. That's why I'm here. I'm doing that. But that means we have to remind ourselves why we're here, and then we are taking care of our families and doing things. And do I think what I'm doing is important for society? Do I contribute in some way that's special? This is one of the, meaning, believe it or not, and values is one of the most important. That, and I'll talk about the psychological safety and fairness piece. So to really sit down and kind of self-reflect, why am I doing this? Does my values match my unit, my supervisor? Because sometimes that's the conflict, that what you value isn't what the unit or the supervisor values. And then it's really having discussions and seeing if you can get on some common ground and understanding. And this is all the second most psychological safety and fairness. Our policies and practices where you work make you feel that things are fairly administered in terms of who gets the opportunities, who gets to do what. Are there things blocking people from moving forward? And so it doesn't feel fair. So these are things that we're really asking for you to kind of think about in regards and relationship to the environment that you're working with. And, do I feel these things, and how can I create these things? Thank you.
Before we leave this slide, as I was listening to you speak, there's 2 things that come to mind, especially whenever I see the word belonging, is just making that bridge between the well-being work and the diversity, equity, and inclusion work, because the thread is belonging. And this idea of finding meaning is really tied to our identity, which is another one of those areas of diversity, you know, that tends to get explored through implicit bias training and other diversity training. So I think all of these topics on in these 5 tiles really connect nicely to what is happening for some people in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when you said values, I also thought of the Barrett values model, and how all of this stuff, if everyone on the call remembers, during the culture transformation journey, we had the discussion around the 7 levels of consciousness in the Barrett model, and all of this stuff tends to be in levels 1 through 3, really trying to meet the core needs of employees in the workplace. So I don't know, those things.
Good point, Kimberly. And I want to say that often discrimination is the opposite of feeling psychologically safety and fairness. So, you know, that's another piece that we have to look at, and also expectations because of who we are. There could be, as you said, unconscious bias, but women are expected to give more. And that's been in surveys over and over again. And, you know, so again, having that fairness piece is really important. But thank you for bringing that up, Kimberly. Yeah.
So that's a great segue into talking about culture and how culture shapes our work ethic and the ethos of work and being a good worker. So we all know that work ethic is the principle that hard work is intrinsically virtuous and worthy of reward. And oftentimes work for some people can just mean a job, a means to provide an end. Sometimes for some people it can be a place for connection. Hopefully that's how most of us feel in our work. And a good worker, this was based on a Forbes article that I read recently, is, you know, dedicated, willing to learn, has attention to detail, is creative, and, you know, all these other buzzwords that good workers feel that they have to, or people who work feel like they have to live up to be a good worker. And Ilene, when you mentioned I think you said something about women feeling like they have to be givers. There's human giver syndrome, and there's a difference between human givers and human beings. And sometimes women fall into the category of being human givers. They feel like they have a moral obligation to give their full humanity to other human beings and give everything that they have, mentally, physically, spiritually, to what they're doing. And then there's human beings who may express that to some extent, but not fully. So that made me think of that. And relating this back to the workplace, if you are in a negative or toxic workplace, or you feel like your personal values don't align with the values of your workplace or your unit or your department, that can ultimately be your stressor, and that may not be something that you're able to combat, because that stressor will exist. You can do everything to combat the stress, but every day when you leave work and you go back, you're going to be dealing with that same brick wall. And what we want you all to walk away with is some of these tools, like the stress response cycle and some of the tips that we had provided earlier, and we'll give you a couple more as we go on. But we need to learn to manage the stress that we're feeling and find healthy ways and healthy outlets to let the stress kind of dissipate. Kimberly, did you have anything to add to this?
Well, thank you for asking. I do, because I think that what you were just describing in terms of stressors for women and people of color, often the stressor is some form of ism, whether it's racism or sexism or some other way that they are being discriminated against. And this whole concept of good worker is potentially a stressor for women, because everything that you use to describe a good worker is agentic language that is often ascribed to men. So if women feel that in order to be a good worker, they have to be more like the men in their organization or exhibit these masculine leadership characteristics, that can be in conflict with them and some of the more natural ways that women express their leadership capabilities. And the more natural ways would be on the communal side. So I think that even just the way we use language can be a stressor, because it prompts people to think they have to act a certain way or be a certain way in order to get ahead or in order to be seen in their work environment. So I just think that that term good worker is loaded.
Ilene?
So just to say here that one of the things you can do if you're, one is obviously to reduce your stress. But the next piece, if you're really starting to feel a burnout level, is to really say, okay, who am I? What do I need? What of those core needs are important to me? What are my values? What are my goals? And then how does that match the culture I am in? Because there are times that leaving, not that we're asking you to quit, we don't want that per se, but you can make the changes within yourself, but you can also try to push and the culture to be more responsive to you. So that could be asking for more appreciation if you're feeling more cynical, or that could be if you're emotionally exhausted, kind of setting real clear boundaries, saying, I'm only working from here to here. I will not look at, I was working with a dean and she's like, I do not check. She has told everyone she doesn't look at emails on Sundays. She just won't do it. And if it's emergency, you're going to pick up the phone and call me. So really kind of setting that. And so our culture, particularly at USC, I don't know if all of you agree with me, is this feeling of like, it's a badge of honor that you're like burnt out, kind of thing. And really that does not help us to be more productive. It does not help us to be more creative. So we really want, central to this burnout is creating congruence in your life. Yeah.
So before we get into our next breakout room to discuss what is the environmental factor that needs to change to prevent or tackle your feelings of burnout, we are going to discuss with you a couple of things, one being the coin metaphor and the likability penalty. And Kimberly will do it more justice than I will, so I'll let her take this over.
Well, we talk about this kind of stuff all the time on our team, and really I think, as the core of the diversity strategy in Dornsife, we really want to provide the tools and things that will help people adapt to the environment and be able to deal with some of the stress that's created from inequities, from lack of diversity, and lack of inclusion. So one thing we were talking about in preparing for this webinar is this idea of coin, and some of you on the call may have gone through a training that was implemented last year in the business office with I think the name of the company is like Solve Wrong or something like that, but it's a company that really teaches you to think differently about your work and be very intentional around like giving feedback and accepting feedback. And the metaphor they taught us was coin. So the C stands for context, really understanding the context in which you're operating, or the conflict, if there's conflict or burnout present, what the circumstances are that are creating that. Then observing, and kind of taking in a little more information that will then help you to understand what the impact of all of this is on you and the people around you. And then the last letter is N for next step. So there's this action piece involved, and it's really important not to miss that, because we can admire a problem, but we really have to get to a place where we can take action. And then the likability penalty is something that's been written about for many years, primarily in the corporate space, but it does apply in universities, especially as more women emerge in very senior leadership roles. And it basically works like this. If you are a woman and you're expressing more of, I would say, the masculine traits of leadership, then you are not likable. We're seeing it expressed right now in our national election cycle, especially with the announcement of the vice presidential candidate on the Democratic ticket. So just think about all the ways that the likability penalty is operating in discussions about her leadership style. And if you are more communal, which I talked about agentic and communal language in describing leaders, as a woman, that also works against you. So it's really like being caught between a rock and a hard place, kind of like Goldilocks. You are looking to be just right, because if you're too hard, you'll be judged critically, and if you're too soft, you also will be judged critically. And so there are different ways of, I guess, trying to balance that or harmonize it so that you aren't in this situation where you're constantly trying to adjust your behavior to fit a certain mode of leadership. So that's the likability penalty.
Yeah, so taking these, all the thoughts that we've, kind of accumulated during the webinar, let's get into breakout rooms for just a couple of minutes. And
we may want to just do this as a large group.
Okay.
Yeah, just because I'm aware of time. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Let me just stop the screen share so we can see everyone's faces.
So when you're thinking, because one of the things we're hoping you get out of this is that burnout comes out from a context. So can any of you think of an environmental kind of factor that needs to change to help you either rejuvenate or to prevent you from burnout? And you can put in the chat room or just unmute yourself.
I don't know if this is quite right, I guess, but one of the stressors right now is uncertainty about schooling, and that I have both my full-time work responsibilities and also caregiving responsibilities, and need to do both. And so I guess in terms of environmental, I would, and thinking back to one of the slides, I would appreciate, or I think I would feel like more like the environment. I think the environment context was, I don't know, anticipating me in my kind of situation. If there was more like statements, but also just strategizing, maybe from my director from the university, or just like about recognizing the situation. I mean, from time to time there's a mention of it, but it's something that many of us are grappling with, is really simultaneous responsibilities, and how it's usually untenable, but somehow will be tenable again.
So Elisa, this is to everybody. It sounds like you're asking for almost permission, if you will, that you're going to have to focus on family. And that was one of the things that came up in the chat room, that some of the things that are really affecting people is taking care of others, that during this time, it's a special time. How many of you feel comfortable or feel like you need permission from a supervisor, or can you give yourself that permission that it's impossible, you're going to have to do maybe 3 hours of worksheets with your, daughter or whatever it might be, some homeschooling. How do others feel about that? Renee, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I appreciate everything you just said, because I fall into the category where I'm caregiving down and up. So to my child and to my parents. I think where it starts is some recognition in terms of performance management and expectations for this year, and there's been zero communication around that. And I know on the staff side, we're pretty clearly judged based upon meeting goals that we articulated, you know, months or even longer ago. And so I think and also given the financial situation of not knowing if we'll all retain jobs in the long term, is like the balancing act of asking for that kind of permission. And so I think, and this isn't a criticism of any particular department. I think we all feel very fortunate we have jobs, and we all feel fortunate that, you know, we have our health, but I think there's this dread of what's next that's kind of pervasive. And even with what you were saying, like, I'm even concerned about schools reopening and then creating a worse health cycle that puts me in further demand for my caregiving needs if my daughter goes back to school and then she gets me sick and I get my mother sick. So there's almost no answer when it comes to alleviating these stressors, because even if things improve, there's the possibility for a decline.
So here's just a tip. I don't know if this will help Renee or Lisa, and others, but we're on the edge of the unknown. We cannot predict where any of this is going to go. So when we're on the edge like that, we actually have to step back, and we have to ask a question of ourselves. Is it useful for me to think about this? Because sometimes it is. By thinking about it, you come up with solutions. You are able to figure out things. Well, if this happens, then this, etc. But other times you don't know the factors, and so to keep on going stay with the worry, it's one of those you have to have faith, or kind of like let it go, if you will. So the first thing is, it's a decision point to kind of really think about, how can I put this? Is this something I should be worrying about? And does it help to worry about it? Now, I also want to say, there may be, what you're bringing up, Renee, is there may be a lack of empathy in the department that is there, that people are not understanding and being compassionate with each other about this. One of the tricks here is, if you can show compassion to your colleagues in some ways, or to even to your supervisor, it starts a system that starts changing. And so you want to kind of do that kind of compassion to each other as best you can. Now, if you have a supervisor, because who's particularly problematic, and as Renee said, there's a fear of, we want to keep our jobs, you need to kind of objectively think, what constitute keeping this job? What is good enough under these circumstances? And to really speak up about that piece, and in some ways use our services like campus wellbeing and education, or the Ombuds office, to go through and say, okay, how do I negotiate with this specific person? Campus support and intervention is another place you can call. That's the 740-0411. They'll tell you how to get online. We can have online conversations, how to work with, but our department can come in to help create a culture of empathy, which may be really lacking. And so it gets scary. And the other thing is, you need to feel confident, and this goes back to the next slide. I'll be quick on this, but obviously you need to take care of your well-being, but that's not enough. You have to be self-aware of what you need. We talked about that. But then the contextual awareness is, do I accept this premise? And if I do, how do I do that? But if I don't, how do I bring this up in a way that is respectful, that is going to be most influential? And if you haven't got help on this already, because it's recognizing the struggle, explore this, and then kind of see if feel this other person out, or whoever you go, or have conversations with your teams. How are we handling this? And we're able to come in to do trainings on what's different about working under these times. Yeah. So I'm aware of the time. Does anyone have a burning question? Because otherwise I thought I'd close with perhaps a quick meditation. All right, I'm gonna go for it. So feel free to turn off your screens if you want. We're just gonna take a few minutes to kind of feel self-love and appreciation. Make yourself comfortable, soften your gaze, or try to kind of relax your body and allow your heart to now open, allowing the corners of your lips to rise slightly, to have your back strong and straight. And now become aware of your breath as you draw in to your heart and you breathe in, I am loved. And as you breathe out, I belong. Breathe in, I am loved. Breathe out, I belong. Breath anchors you to feel safe. Now take the time to think of a certain situation where you felt accepted, valued, loved, a time where there was deep connection, attainment, appreciation. Allow yourself to tune into that feeling of being appreciated. How does this energy influence your mind, your body, your soul? Inside of you is an eternal spring of loving kindness that you can tap into at any time you choose. Allow that energy to grow. Trust in knowing that there's an endless supply for you and for others. Now place your hands on your heart and please repeat silently after me. May I be happy. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be at peace. Take a breath. Be aware of the world around you. And may the feelings of loving kindness and being appreciated be part of your day and every day. Thank you all for coming. I want to speak for the university if I could. You are appreciated. We don't want you exhausted. We want you to figure out what your limits are and what your strengths are and to feel that kindness. So just let us know what you need. And we want you to just, this is tough times, and use compassion to self and loving kindness to you and your teams and the people you interact with, because that is a true way to combat burnout as well. Know what matters to you. I hope it's helpful, and we're here for any questions, etc. at any time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. We'll be sending out the recording and resources along with the recording and a link to a survey after this in the next day or two. But thank you all for attending.